There will be many others who will come back who will have to abandon their former way of life. I was thinking, as an example, a homosexual. Now, this former homosexual comes back in the resurrection, and he really thought, and he was taught, and he came to believe that God accepted him with that lifestyle. But now he's going to learn about Jehovah's moral standard.
You know the sound: a sharp knock, the rustle of a magazine, the awkward silence of a door that won't open. For over a century, that knock was the unmistakable signature of Jehovah's Witnesses. Millions of doors, millions of conversations, millions of slammed doors and awkward goodbyes. But look at any city street today, and the soundtrack has changed. The knock has been replaced by silence. The door has been swapped for a folding table. The cart has arrived. It started as an experiment in France back in 2001. A few witnesses took luggage trolleys and grocery carts into public squares. They set up small displays, they waited, and something unexpected happened. People actually approached them. By 2011, the organization was testing the concept in New York City. Handmade wooden carts appeared in train stations and busy intersections. The results were promising enough that by 2012, the governing body approved the carts for worldwide use. Today, there are over 165,000 of these rolling carts on streets across the globe. The organization has spent more than $16 million manufacturing them. But here's the question the Watchtower doesn't want you to ask. Why would the most aggressive door knockers in history suddenly stop knocking? The official answer sounds reasonable enough. They'll tell you it's about reaching people who aren't home during the day. They'll say it gives the public a choice to approach or not. But the official story is only half the story. The real reasons are far more troubling. And to understand them, we need to look at what was really happening behind those closed doors. So what's the official story? The Watchtower will tell you this was simply a smart adaptation, a way to reach modern people where they actually are. It started quietly in France. Back in 2001, a few witnesses took luggage trolleys and grocery carts into public squares. They set up small displays, they waited, and something unexpected happened. People actually approached them. The experiment worked so well that by 2011, the governing body approved a pilot program in New York City. Handmade wooden carts appeared in train stations and busy intersections. The results were promising. By 2012, the carts were approved for worldwide use. The organization points to the Bible for justification. In the book of Acts, chapter 5, first-century Christians went to the temple, a public place where many people gathered to share their message. The logic was simple. If it worked for them, it could work now. Officially, there are three main reasons for the shift. First, reaching people who aren't home. With both spouses working and gated communities everywhere, door knocking just doesn't connect with as many people anymore. Second, respecting public preference. As one witness explained, with our new cart activity, we don't approach them. Instead of knocking on doors, they wait for the people to approach them. It gives the public a choice. And third, it's presented as a complement. The house-to-house ministry, they insist, remains the primary way of spreading Bible truth. But here's where the official story starts to crack. Because if door-to-door is still the primary method, why has it practically disappeared in so many places? Let's look at the numbers. In 2011, there were 0 literature carts anywhere in the world. By March 2015, just 4 years later, there were already 165,390 carts supplied to congregations globally. That's over 165,000 carts in less than 4 years. By 2022, that number had grown even further. The organization has spent millions manufacturing these carts. Each one costs about $43 to produce. Do the math. 165,000 cards at $43 each is over $7 million. Add ongoing production and replacement costs, and the total investment easily exceeds $16 million. Now compare that to door-to-door work. In 2019, Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide spent over 2 billion hours preaching. 2 billion hours. That's the equivalent of over 228,000 years of continuous preaching. And what did they get for it? Barely 300,000 baptisms. Half of those were people born into witness families. When you strip out the heritage baptisms, people who were basically born into the religion, you're left with perhaps 15,000 genuine converts for every billion hours of preaching. The conversion rate is so anemic that it takes over 10,000 hours of preaching for a single baptism. And when you account for members leaving or dying, it takes 40,000 hours just to increase the total number of witnesses by one person. The numbers don't add up. Door-to-door work had become one of the most inefficient recruitment methods in history. So the organization had a choice: keep wasting billions of hours on a dying method, or find something easier. They chose the cart. But inefficiency wasn't the only problem. There was something else happening behind those closed doors. The truth is, most Jehovah's Witnesses don't enjoy door-to-door work. Many see it as a burden, a chore they're forced to do, something they dread. Think about what door knocking actually involves: walking miles through rain and heat, facing rejection after rejection, getting doors slammed in your face, being yelled at, sometimes even threatened.
For decades, this was the price of being a witness. You had to do it, or you'd be labeled inactive. And being inactive came with consequences: pressure from elders, judgment from the congregation, even the loss of privileges. Then came the carts. Suddenly, you didn't have to walk anywhere. You didn't have to face rejection at hundreds of doors. You just sat at a stationary cart in a public place and waited. People could approach you if they wanted. If they didn't, no problem. Critics noticed something else too. Many witnesses are actually pretty bad at explaining their own beliefs. When someone at a door asks a tough question, they freeze. They can't articulate a meaningful response. The cart solved this problem too. The literature speaks for itself. The member doesn't need to be a theologian. They just need to stand there and hand out publications. It's passive witnessing, low risk, low skill. Critics have called this genius in a cynical way. The organization solved a major problem. They had millions of members who couldn't effectively preach, so they created a method that didn't require effective preaching. But there's another angle to this. The cart also protects the organization. When a member says something wrong at a door, it reflects poorly on the religion. When a member just hands out literature, there's no risk of theological error. The message is controlled. The interaction is limited. The member is just a dispenser of approved publications. This is brilliant from a management perspective, but it raises a disturbing question. If members can't articulate their own beliefs, what does that say about the organization that trained them? And that question leads us to the darkest part of this story. Now we get to the part the Watchtower really doesn't want you to know about. Between 2013 and 2017, Australia held a royal commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. It was one of the most comprehensive investigations of its kind ever conducted. The commission examined dozens of institutions, churches, schools, charities. The findings were shocking across the board, but what they found about Jehovah's Witnesses was particularly damning. The Australia branch of Jehovah's Witnesses had records of 1,006 alleged perpetrators of child sexual abuse, over 1,000 abusers. These allegations involved more than 1,800 victims. And here's the part that's hard to believe. The church reported none of these cases to the police. Not one. Zero. The commission found that Jehovah's Witnesses were not an organization which responded adequately to abuse. Children were not adequately protected from the risk of child sexual abuse in the organization. There was also evidence that the organization may have misled the commission and its testimony. They weren't just failing to protect children, they were potentially lying about it.
The commission also revealed that about 11% of the alleged perpetrators were elders or ministerial servants. These were the people in positions of trust. The very people supposed to protect children were sometimes the ones abusing them. Governing body member Jeffrey Jackson was called to testify. He was questioned under oath about the organization's policies. The testimony was uncomfortable. The organization's practices were exposed for the world to see. But Australia wasn't the beginning. Around the world, courts and governments were reaching similar conclusions. Australia wasn't an isolated incident. The same pattern emerged worldwide. In the United Kingdom, the BBC's Panorama program investigated the Jehovah's Witnesses back in 2002. The documentary uncovered evidence of a database of members suspected of child abuse, many of whom have never been reported to the police. This was more than a decade before the Australian Commission. The UK Parliament even debated the findings. Members of Parliament congratulated the BBC on its showing of the Panorama program, which exposes the lack of an appropriate child protection policy amongst Jehovah's Witnesses. In 2015, a UK court ordered Jehovah's Witnesses to pay £275,000 to a woman who was sexually abused as a child. It was the first civil case of its kind in the UK. The court found that elders had failed to protect her from a pedophile in the congregation. In 2019, the Charity Commission for England and Wales investigated the organization's safeguarding policies. In the United States, the pattern continued. In October 2022, Pennsylvania's Attorney General charged 4 members of Jehovah's Witness congregations with child sexual abuse. Then, in February 2023, 5 more men were charged. Then, in July 2023, another 5. In total, 14 men were charged over a single year. Some of these cases involved children as young as 4 years old. The abusers were described as having used their positions of trust to access victims. This is a global pattern: Australia, the UK, the United States. And the organization's response has consistently been the same: deny, hide, and protect the institution. Now, ask yourself this: if you were a Jehovah's Witness, how would you feel knocking on a stranger's door, knowing what the world now knows about your organization? This is where the cart becomes more than just convenience. It becomes a shield. So now we connect the dots. Door-to-door work had become a liability, not just because it was inefficient, not just because members were burnt out, but because the public had started to see Jehovah's Witnesses differently. The scandals changed everything. When someone knocks on your door now, you might not just say, "not interested." You might say, "I know what your organization did in Australia." You might say, "I saw the BBC documentary." You might say, "I read about the Pennsylvania charges." The organization knew this. They had to adapt. Enter the cart. The cart is passive. It doesn't confront anyone. It doesn't invade private space. It sits in public, waiting to be approached. The witness behind it isn't aggressive. They're just there. It's a complete reversal of identity. The knock was aggressive. The cart is passive. The door was private. The sidewalk is public. Critics have pointed out that the cart allows the organization to appear nice and approachable. It's image management, brand rehabilitation. Former members have noted that the carts often get very little public interaction. People walk right past. But that doesn't matter. The cart serves a different purpose. It shows that witnesses are still active. It gives members something to do. It maintains the illusion of a thriving ministry. One observer called the cart strategy one of the organization's rabbits in the hat, a trick to distract from the legal battles on the international stage. Look at the timing. The carts were approved for worldwide use in 2012. The Australian Royal Commission began its investigation in 2013. The UK civil case was decided in 2015. The Pennsylvania charges came in 2022 and 2023. The organization was adapting to a crisis they knew was coming. The cart wasn't just convenience, it was survival. But even this wasn't enough. It took a global pandemic to finally make the transition permanent.